The Jets add to their offense and their defense on night 2 of the NFL draft. Both prospects the team selected are intriguing, but the overall strategy is open to some questioning. Let's break it all down today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Saturday, April 26th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangReNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. Well, we are here today. It is a special Saturday edition of Locked On Jets. After night 2 of the 2025 NFL Draft, Jets added a pair of players, one on offense, one on defense last night in the second and third rounds, respectively. And I think that there are some questions we can bring up about the overall strategy of the draft, of the direction the Jets have taken in this year's NFL draft. But let's begin by welcoming the two newest members of the team. And we can start with the player the Jets drafted at 42nd overall in the second round of the draft. It is Mason Taylor, a tight end out of LSU. And I actually did not realize this until last night. I knew of Mason Taylor. I did not realize that he is the son of NFL Hall of Famer Jason Taylor. And if you're a Jets fan right now, and if you've been a Jets fan for like 2 decades or longer, you know that there's some delicious irony in the fact that Jets drafted Jason Taylor's son, because at one time, there was no bigger antagonist to the Jets or to Jets fans than Jason Taylor. The guy was a quote machine during his tenure with the Miami Dolphins, bashing the Jets, bashing Jets fans, and now he's got to watch his son play for the Jets. Oh, that's just delicious. Although Taylor actually did play for the Jets at the end of his career for 1 year in 2010. So I don't know, maybe he mended some fences. But in any event, the Jets add a tight end. Now, I think heading into the draft, everybody knew tight end was a big need for the Jets. I mean, prior to last night, Jeremy Ruckert was the number 1 tight end on the roster. And of course, the Jets drafted Ruckert in the third round 3 years ago. And Ruckert has simply not developed. He's not shown much as a receiver. If anything, he's kind of like regressed from where he was as a receiver at Ohio State. I mean, at this point, I'm not even sure Ruckert can be counted on to catch passes that go directly to him. And while Ruckert has some highlight reel blocks, he's not a consistent blocker on a play-to-play basis. So all of this opens an opportunity for Mason Taylor to immediately step into the starting lineup. In fact, I would say it would be a disappointment if Mason Taylor was not able to establish himself immediately as the number 1 tight end on the roster. And beyond that, Mason Taylor is going to have an opportunity to play a big role in this offense, because the Jets, beyond Garrett Wilson, don't really have much as far as receiving targets go. I mentioned this on yesterday's show. I mean, I think heading into round 2 of the NFL draft, Breece Hall was probably the second most dangerous receiving threat on the team. And while Breece has the ability to make plays, he's a running back. You don't want your running back to be one of your top receiving threats. So what did the Jets get in Mason Taylor? They got a guy who I think at this point you could say is more a receiver than a blocker. And in today's NFL, the tight end provides most of his value through his ability as a receiver. Yeah, you'd like a guy who could block, but at the end of the day, it is a passing league. You want to be able to have a big pass catching target. Taylor actually, he's in the 250s when we're talking about his weight. So he has the frame to potentially become a good blocker. I think it's fair to say right now, he really is not much of a blocker. What does he provide? The word I've used over the last 12 hours when I've broken down Taylor, he's kind of like a crafty route runner. He understands how to read coverages. He understands how to find a hole in the defense. And, I think what he has the potential to be is a reliable target for Justin Fields or, any other player who passes the ball for the Jets in 2025. This is obviously, again, it's not a very talented receiving group. It's a group with Garrett Wilson and a lot of question marks, few of whom have a whole lot of upside. So Taylor's going to could develop into the type of guy, a good positive short outlet for Justin Fields. There are other aspects of his game that need work, though. He's not a finished product. That's why, he went behind, the tight ends who went in the first round, led by, of course, by Tyler Warren, who was the second tight end off the board. Two tight ends went in the first round. Taylor's got to work. I mean, I think his routes could use a little bit of nuance. I don't think he always uses subtlety changing his speeds. I think when you're a route runner, you have to be able to adjust your speed to be able to set defenders up. Maybe you start a route out, maybe not going full speed, and then you pick it up as you hit them trying to run past them, or you accelerate really quick running past him, then throw on the brakes and come back to him. I think that's an area where Taylor could use a bit of work. I'm not sure he's ever going to be a deep threat. I'm not sure he's ever going to be a guy who's terribly explosive. I think he's going to be more of a guy who works the short part of the field, big enough, maybe just enough athleticism that he could be a threat in the intermediate part of the field. And a guy who, you're hoping will develop into a quality tight end number one in this league. And, in an ideal world, I think you'd like to bring him in as your number two tight end, because, there are some things he's got to work on, both blocking and the things I just mentioned as a receiver. Of course, unfortunately, right now, the Jets don't really have that luxury, which, can be a benefit for a young guy. It means that, you're going to get opportunities. So some guy, if you go to a team that's loaded with talent at your position, you may be sitting on Sunday. Sometimes the best way to develop is to get on the field and you can get your opportunities. And there should be opportunities aplenty for Mason Taylor as a rookie. Again, because the Jets they don't have much at tight end. They don't have much as far as pass catchers go. So I'm not surprised that the Jets drafted a tight end in round 2, because clearly it was one of the top needs on the roster. It was, if we're being honest, and I'm trying to not be disrespectful to Jeremy Ruckert and the other tight ends on the team right now, the position was pretty much a black hole heading into last night. And Taylor's a guy, you'll hear a lot about his pedigree, because his father's, again, a Hall of Famer. He's got an uncle who was also a Hall of Famer, Azareye'h Thomas, who was a great player with the Miami Dolphins, actually teammates with Jason Taylor for quite a while. So, you hear his name, you hear about who he's related to. That's a really, that's something that will certainly get people excited. And there are aspects of his game which are pretty intriguing. Pretty good athletes. Maybe doesn't have burning speed, but a guy with enough athleticism, enough speed to become to threaten the defense, at least to the intermediate part of the field. Is Mason Taylor ever going to be an elite tight end? I think if he's going to be an elite tight end, he just have to be like one of those guys who's just unbelievable at finding holes in zones, like a Mark Andrews in Baltimore. He's not a guy who's great at beating man coverage, at least at this point. I'm not sure he necessarily has the tools to ever become that great of a guy, but I think he's definitely a guy with quality number one tight end upside. If he hits that I think his ceiling can be a productive starting tight end in this league. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the Jets' third round pick, and I think this was a pick that raised eyebrows because it did not address an immediate need. The Jets drafted a corner in the third round, and you may look at this and say, well, the Jets have Sauce Gardner, they have Brandon Stevens, they have Michael Carter II. Why would you draft a corner? There are some good reasons to that. Part of them relate to how our immediate expectations of third round picks are too high. Part of it relates to just the player's upside. We'll break down what the Jets did in the third round and how it could make sense as we continue here on this special Saturday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's special Saturday edition of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work does not end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner who works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free. Share it with your network and get qualified candidates all in one place. The Jets have a scouting department. The Jets can find the players they want to draft. There's no draft for your business. Let LinkedIn be your scouting department to help you find the best qualified candidates out there. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and then bonus episodes like this one on Saturday as we break down what the Jets did on night 2 of the 2025 NFL Draft. Now, after the Jets drafted Mason Taylor at 42nd, they moved on to the 3rd round. And the Jets picking in both the 2nd and the 3rd rounds has become not a common occurrence. This is actually only the 2nd time in 5 years the Jets have a pick in both the 2nd and 3rd rounds. And within the 3rd round, the Jets made a pick that was a bit of a surprise. They picked Azareye'h Thomas, a quarterback out of Florida State. I don't think many people thought the Jets were going corner in the 3rd round. In fact, I think a lot of people probably figured the Jets would go wide receiver. You know, the two needs that remain on offense were both pass catching positions. One was tight end and one was wide receiver. In fact, I think there's a decent amount of criticism for the Jets drafting Thomas because the view is that corner is not really a need for this team. And if you were looking for the Jets to address an immediate need, I would agree with you. And I do think there may have been some receivers there in the 3rd round who probably could have stepped into prominent roles. Again, that relates to just how little the Jets have going at the wide receiver position. But it's also difficult to expect a 3rd round pick to go in and contribute immediately. You know, sometimes a 3rd round pick gets pressed into a starting role, mainly because you have nothing else, but that doesn't mean he's going to play well right off the bat. The guys who go in the 3rd rounds, they tend to not be plug and play guys. Every year there's a couple of guys who step in and are good players immediately coming from the 3rd round. But generally speaking, if you're going to be able to play from day one and play effectively, you're probably a 1st or 2nd round pick. The guys who go in the 3rd round, their games are a little bit more flawed. They need a little bit more work. So I never really view a 3rd round pick as a spot where the expectations that you're going to get good play right off the bat. People don't appreciate how rare it is for a 3rd round pick to step in and make an immediate positive impact. Sometimes they get playing time, but most of the time they don't play well. So I don't have a problem with taking someone like Azareye'h Thomas. He is a bit of a developmental player, but the Jets actually have the luxury of kind of like developing him because they have Sauce Gardner on the team as the number 1 corner. I think the guy Thomas eventually would replace would be Brandon Stephens, who they just signed in free agency from Baltimore. I think what will happen is Thomas will begin the 2025 season probably as the number 4 corner on the team behind Sauce Gardner, Brandon Stephens, and Michael Carter II. And the reason the Jets want him is pretty clear. You know, he's a guy who very much fits the mold of what Aaron Glenn wants in a corner. You know, he's very lengthy, got long arms. And Aaron Glenn likes to play press man coverage. And press man coverage means you're lining up right across from the receiver and you're using your arms to try and disrupt him right on the line of scrimmage as he goes into his route. And the reason you'd play press man coverage is that in today's NFL, a lot of pass routes are based on timing. You know, there's a lot of quick passes that go out there, and it very precise. These offensive play calls. You're expecting a receiver to be at a certain spot at a certain point. It's got to be like clockwork. That's the way. I mean, it's amazing when you actually like dive in, just like the precision with which NFL passing games are expected to run with. And we have a good press corner, and Sauce Gardner is a really good press corner himself. You get your hands on the guy in the first 5 yards because the first 5 yards down the field, you're allowed to touch a receiver. Once you get 5 yards down the field, you can't touch a receiver or it's illegal contact. But those first 5 yards, you can disrupt him. If the receiver kind of gets knocked off balance, if the receiver, kind of stumbles, if the receiver's obstructed getting to his spot, you can essentially destroy the passing play. Now, Thomas is not a guy I would want to count on to play this year, at least for an extended portion of time. If there's an injury, maybe you can get by with him for a week or two. But this is the type of guy, like, if you weren't worried about needs, and again, like in the 3rd round, maybe a little bit you factor in need, but less than the 2nd round and far less than the 1st. If we were just like looking at this in general without like any preconception of what you thought the Jets were going to draft, this would be a perfectly reasonable pick. I mean, there's nobody who really, if you look at the analysts, and I know the analysts aren't always right, but most of the analysts had him going around this range, if not earlier. I don't think there's any major analyst who thought that this guy would be an enormous reach in the early stages of the 3rd round. And I think one of the dangers you have when you're watching the draft is you kind of like, and this is especially true once you get to like round 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. your knowledge of like the players kind of goes down because you can only have good knowledge of so many players. So you kind of like focus on like maybe 2 or 3 guys in each round that you think are like the only viable players for your team, and they tend to be guys who play positions where your team needs help. They tend to be the spots where your team's the weakest. The problem is that the odds are very much against these players being good right off the bat. Because again, like once you get past round 2, especially, if you find a starter, it can happen, but it's more like you're lucky than it is the expectation. And that's true as early as round 3. People don't realize this. Most round 3 guys aren't immediate players. The reality, though, is your team's like kind of thinking the long run. Your team's trying to find long-term players. Your team's not just focused on filling the short-term needs. You're looking to find guys who will be impact players going forward. And in Aaron Glenn's defense, we've talked a lot about this offseason. Corner is going to be the most important position. We went from a situation where Robert Saleh ran a defense where defensive line was at a premium. That's why you saw the Jets invest so much in the defensive line. That's why you saw them use so many early draft picks on the defensive line during the Saleh era. That's why you saw them spend in free agency to bring in defensive linemen during the Saleh era, because Saleh wanted to rush 4 guys and get to the quarterback and play coverage with 7. And that means you got to have talented guys who get to the quarterback because they're not going to get help from blitzers. It means one of those 4 guys has to get home. And in Aaron Glenn defense, you're going to blitz more, which means that your corners are going to have to hold up one-on-one. That makes corner the most important position. And one thing I can tell you is you don't want to wait till you have a desperate need at corner when you're running a defense like this to make a move. What you want is for 2 years down the line, if you're ready to move on from Brandon Stevens, you want to have somebody who's ready to go. You don't want to have to develop. You want that person to already be developed. And sometimes drafting successfully means that you have to think a couple years down the line. And that's especially true once you get to the later rounds. I think as early as round 3, that's true. So I understand the skepticism, but I would say I think this is an intriguing prospect at an important position who fits the Jets defense really well. He has the tools that Aaron Glenn looks for. So I will tell you, like, I'm not going to guarantee you that Thomas is going to be a great corner in this league. I don't know how good he's going to be. What I would say is I think this is a reasonable pick. I think he has tools that make him worth developing. I think he has tools that make him a viable option at this point of the draft. And I understand why the Jets did it, because it's not only about what you need right now. And we talked about this a lot, if you're new to the show, like through the much of the offseason, I've talked about how you're just going to have to come to terms with the fact that the Jets were not going to be able to fill all of their holes this offseason. This is a team that entered the offseason short on resources. So your focus is on building a core of talent. And the hope, I think, is that Thomas can be part of that core of talent going forward, because the draft isn't just about the here and now. The draft is also about the future. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, none of this is to say the Jets are above skepticism. None of this is to say the Jets are above criticism. I do have some questions about the way the Jets managed this day 2 of the NFL draft. I think that some of their strategy has left itself open to, if not open criticism, at least a deeper look. And we'll take that deeper look as we continue here on this Saturday edition of Locked On Jets. This special edition of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action, because right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. You got to love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking your favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. A lot of you are Knicks fans because you live in the New York area, but you can live across the country. You can root for other teams in the NBA playoffs. No matter who you root for, FanDuel is the best place to get in on the action. Or if your team's not in the playoffs, again, FanDuel is a great way to keep up with what's going on in the NBA. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Again, it's FanDuel.com to claim that $250 in bonus bets today. FanDuel.com. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. It's a special Saturday edition breaking down what the Jets did on night 2 of the 2025 NFL draft. 2 new members of the New York Jets, Mason Taylor, a tight end out of LSU, and Azareye'h Thomas, a cornerback out of Florida State, are the 2 players the Jets selected last night. I try to be very gentle with any criticism I have of what the Jets do in the NFL draft, and that is a hard-earned lesson that I've taken through the years, because I think anybody who tries to break down the NFL draft and speaks with certainty realizes that none of us can really predict the future. All we can do is make educated guesses about what is to come. I will say that I did leave night 2 of the NFL draft with a few questions about the way the Jets managed things. I really liked what the Jets did night 1, picking Armand Membu out of Missouri, getting a high-end prospect at a critical position of need, a position that not just where the Jets needed help, but a position that's really important, a position at right tackle that is a driving force behind wins and losses. And I look at what the Jets did night 2. And night 2, coming in, I think the number one issue the team had was a lack of quality pass catchers behind Garrett Wilson. So you have to balance, as I just said, you can't be focused solely on immediate needs. You have to balance the here and now versus the future. But there were a couple things that left me scratching my head a little bit. And one of them is not that the Jets drafted a corner, but I look at what the Jets did in the second round. And they of course picked the tight end Mason Taylor. And then you turn around in the third round and you take Azareye'h Thomas. And at 42, Will Johnson was available. Will Johnson's the consensus top corner prospect in this draft. And look, consensus top player at any position can disappoint. Johnson fell because of some medical concerns. Sometimes you see this. It's not so much of the players injured at the moment. It's more, it can be more that, there's something about him that makes teams skeptical he's going to be able to hold up over the long run. Good example of that would be Miles Jack, who was a linebacker the Jaguars drafted in round 2 many years ago. Jack was at one point viewed as a consensus top 10 pick, and then the medicals came back and there were concerns, this guy's not going to last for a long time in the NFL. So he dropped out of the first round. Round 2, the calculus changes, because round 2, if you can get a couple high-end years out of a player, it might be worth the pick. And that's what Jack went round 2, was really good his first couple of years, then fell off dramatically after, maybe 4 years in the league. In round 1, you want to get a guy who's an 8 to 10 year player. Round 2, it varies. You'd like a really good high end player. You'd like somebody who's really good for 10 years, but you'd also take someone who's elite for 4 years. We don't know what Will Johnson's medicals were, but Arizona picked him a couple slots after the Jets. Arizona picked him about five slots after where the Jets picked. So, there's another team out there. I wouldn't even say this if Johnson fell to round 3 or even out of day 2 entirely and was still on the board as we speak. But Will Johnson was drafted a couple slots after where the Jets picked, which means Arizona was fine with his medicals. At least they were fine enough to take him round 2. And of course, maybe the Jets are right and Arizona's wrong. Maybe Arizona's the only team that thought his medicals were okay. I'm certainly not here to declare that the Arizona Cardinals are the smartest team in the league and everything they do is infallible. But I was left wondering a little bit about the Jets passing on the guy who was the top consensus corner in the class, only to draft a different corner in round 3. Thomas was a perfectly reasonable pick in a vacuum. On his own, I don't have any problem picking him in round 3, but you pass on Johnson and then take another quarter round later. And it's not just passing on Johnson for a player like Taylor, who I don't think is a bad prospect. And again, I think could be a number 1 tight end in this league. But how much does a number 1 tight end do for you? I mean, I'm a big believer that there are only a handful, maybe 3 to 5 tight ends who genuinely make a difference in the league at any given point in time. And I don't know that Taylor has the ability to be one of those guys. I don't know that he's really going to be a guy you ever run your passing game through. I think that maybe there's a small path for him to do that if he just becomes super elite at reading coverages and maybe improves his route running, gets a little bit more polish. But I don't think that's the type of thing that's projectable for a guy like Taylor, the way it may have been a year ago for somebody like Brock Bowers. I feel like prospects like Taylor aren't that uncommon. And while I do think if he hits his ceiling, he could be a number 1 tight end, I don't know that number 1 tight end is necessarily the ceiling I'm looking for at 42, particularly when there's a top flight corner available, and taking it a step further, particularly when you're going to draft another corner in round 3. And this takes me to another little concern that I have is I don't think that it's all about the immediate needs right now, but pass catching is the type of thing, getting quality pass catchers is not just the type of thing that helps you now. It's the type of thing that helps you down the road. And I can't say that I love the Jets leaving this draft with only one pass catcher in the top 100 picks. And again, that pass catcher is a tight end who could be a good player, but even if he hits his ceiling, it's probably not going to be a huge difference maker. I think if everything goes right for Mason Taylor, he's probably a guy who's a quality starter. He's probably a guy, you're happy with with the pick you used on him. But still, I'd like to have more upside. I'd like to have a bigger boom scenario than that, especially when the pass catching group's in the state it's in, because it's not just about the here and now. Going forward, the Jets need better pass catchers. It's not just for 2025, for 2026, 2027, 2028. You bring in a guy, he's going to be able to help you. You're going to be able to add playmaking ability down the road. So if I had criticisms of the Jets draft, those are what they would be. And none of this should be taken to mean that I'm bashing the Jets draft, but I think that there were some strategic choices the Jets made that maybe leave them open to some questioning, because there were a couple opportunities out there that they passed up on. And look, maybe the Jets will be proven right, but I think if you're looking at what the best practices are in the NFL, these are areas where we did not definitively see the Jets follow the course that leads to the greatest returns. Of course, time will tell. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Saturday, everybody, and enjoy day 3 of the NFL draft. We'll be back later to break down what the Jets did.